Good day, everyone. Welcome for joining us in this property series, this webinar on German property and investing, in a primary currency. Joining me today, we have Jade, a colleague of mine from Holborn here in South Africa. Welcome, Jade.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Tom, for having me today. I'm really excited.
Tom is one of our resident experts that we use. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you very much for having me, Matthew. And hi, Jane.
So just a brief background on everyone. Myself and Jade, we are wealth managers with Holborn, which is a global company, one of the second largest independent financial advisory globally. And joining us in this webinar today, our guest is Tom Bland. Tom Bland is a senior consultant for IP Global, and Tom comes with a vast experience behind him, starting off as a financial advisor and then going on to be into the field of structured finance and ultimately then into global property investment. And if I remember correctly, it's an average of 25 years worth of experience, Tom?
Just over, yes. I know I don't look it, but...
yeah, so as Jade said earlier, you started when you were 2. Jade, being a wealth manager, like myself here in South Africa, a lot of what we do is advising clients globally in terms of structuring of their wealth, helping them to mitigate many of the risks that come along with it, geopolitical risk, currency depreciation, hence why we're having this chat on a primary currency investment, something such as property in euros. To give you a bit of background on Holborn, as mentioned earlier, we're the second largest independent financial advisory globally. We have licenses and offices in over 14 countries spanning the globe, literally all the way on the other end, starting in Vietnam, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Thailand, all the way through Australia, South Africa, Mauritius, out in Europe, Cyprus, Portugal, Namibia, South Africa, where we're from at the moment, and even all the way through to the US. We pride ourselves on the fact that, we look after our clients and they are what we base everything on. Last year, if we look at the sort of International Investment Awards, there we took away 8. And that's the sort of the Oscars, if you want, of our industry. We also make sure, that when it comes to giving clients financial advice and structuring things, we look not only in terms of the jurisdiction, but also in terms of the security when it comes to clients. So often we will choose jurisdictions where we know there is some form of government-backed investor protection or protection scheme. You'll find that also, as opposed to your general financial advisor or your private banker, we're a lot more qualified in that we're required to be internationally qualified, and every financial advisor and wealth manager with Holborn is required to be licensed through the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investments, which is the industry leader out in the UK. And then finally, the fact that as an independent advisory, we advise our clients from a truly independent point of view. It's one of those things. If I work for company A, you and I both know, no matter what conversation we have, at the end of the day, I'm going to give you a product from company A. Likewise, if I had company B's hat on today, I'd be selling you company B. But we pride ourselves in the fact that we are truly independent. And part of that independence is that we have a large group of companies that we work with, one of them being IP Global, and hence why we've invited them to join us with this webinar. Taking us away, though, we're first going to have Jade give you an overview of how Holborn, being a wealth management company, looks at property investment from a wealth structuring side.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for that, Matt. And thank you, Tom, for joining us. This is probably one of my most favorite places to look at property and where I 100% recommend my clients consider investing. So just with regards to property, how we look at property versus how we would look at a traditional investment. So it's very different in that we would do what's called a top-down approach. So the first thing we'll look at when we consider any sort of property investment for our clients is the government. Then we'll narrow down to the city, the neighborhood, and finally the developer. That's where Tom Bland and IP Global come in. So not only do we want to look at a country where we can grow your wealth, not in a South African rand terms, but in global terms. So euros, pounds, Swiss francs, dollars. We only look at a hard currency investment. We then narrow it down a step further and we say, where can you as a South African, that's where most of our viewers today are from, where can you as a South African get capital as a non-resident? So for example, in America, are you able to get a mortgage that is favorable? Are you able to get loan to value of up to 70%? Probably not. So that we take America out of the equation. Then we take it another step further and we look at tax, because it can be the most amazing investment in the world, as we all know, but tax can eat away half of the investment case. And therefore we look at, where are you as a South African going to not be penalized and pay more tax as a non-resident than you would as a resident? So then that narrows down a whole bunch more countries. And then finally, and this I think also strikes a bit of a nerve when it comes to South African clients, but protection of property rights. So as soon as they mutter or say the words land expropriation with or without compensation, we immediately take that out of the equation. So after we've gone through all of these steps, we then finally get to the actual city. We look at the infrastructure, the building permission, the planning permission, the supply and demand imbalance, which we're going to get into a little bit later with regards to Germany, where there is such a huge supply and demand imbalance. And then eventually, we then look at the actual development. So where can we find somewhere that's firstly, based in a city or very close to a city, where you have access to public transport, to schools, and to work. And that's eventually, so it's a thorough process that IP Global and Tom Bland go through. And as well as ourselves, we do huge amounts of due diligence into, as I said, the country up until the point of the developer, look at their track record and make sure that if we give our stamp of approval as Holborn and our property committee and our property team, it is completely above board. They have a great track record, and from point A to point B, they will hold your hand and make sure that the development completes on time, it completes, and that your returns are the best that they could possibly be. So that's in a nutshell how we narrow down property. So as I said, hard currency, the taxes we look at very, very, diligently. And then eventually, where can you get a great mortgage where your tenant essentially pays off your mortgage? And that's essentially how we get into property. So yeah, Matt, I'm not sure if you'd like Tom to maybe introduce IP Global, but from our side, yeah, property is an amazing investment, especially as a South African. It's a rich, how to make other people's money work for you, the rich dad, poor dad mentality of, essentially making other people's money work for you.
Exactly. Yes. I think there are so few people out there who realize that when it comes to international property, one is able to leverage. And unfortunately, when it comes to investment, the average person out there, when it comes to property in particular, will look not further than their own city or their own town in some instances.
I think we've lost Matt.
I think we have, and we've lost Tom, I think. So I think it's just
I'm still here.
Oh, we've got Tom. Okay, great.
So should I guess that's a signal for me to jump on in.
Yeah, I think poor Matt's just gone into load shedding. So which is one of the reasons we don't look at South Africa as an investment, is also the Eskom issues. But Tom, you got to take it away for us.
Sure. So let me share my screen. So starting from the beginning, let's make sure. Oops, there we go. So again, thank you both for having me on. As Matt said, I work for a company called IP Global, who we purely specialize in offshore property investment. We are actually head officed in Hong Kong, and we have further 12 offices around the world, with the majority of the business we do from the Middle East and the Far East. And then really the concept, we pioneered the sort of direct property investment, taking advantage of the ability to leverage property, but also learning from, our experience of which locations we need to look at. So just echoing Jade's thoughts on with regards to tier one safe haven countries where foreigners have the rights to own property there. There's a very transparent legal system, and there's access to finance. So when I first saw the actual invite for the webinar, I was rather concerned, as there's a lot to go through, and as Jade knows, I could actually go on all day, but I'm sure no one wants to listen to me for that long. So I've really tried to summarize it as best I can, and I've put this presentation together particularly for this webinar, but I might skip through some slides just purely as I'll be saving this document and it will obviously be sent out. So the information's there. I'm just conscious of the fact that I want to try and keep on point and also aware of timing. So quick overview on IP Global, Germany overview. Then we really focused on two cities in Germany, and that's Berlin and Leipzig. So I'll go through all that and what's so unique about it. Then our current opportunities, just so you get to see what we're up to. Elephant in the room, I think there's certain things happening around the world, and I like to address them head on, not hide behind them. We're very transparent in everything we do. I just want to have a quick look at a wealth report issued by Knight Frank, which just came out, and then the cash flows and projected returns, which I believe Jade and Matthew will be going through. So without further ado, IP Global, like I say, we've been around for about 17 years. And we've done over $3 billion worth of properties across 18 countries worldwide, more than 5,700 apartments in more than 42 international cities. Track record as a snapshot, UK has always dominated our offering and always will, but we pride ourselves in, as we talk about investing in property and diversifying your investment portfolio, so is true about investing in property. We firmly believe that a diversified property portfolio is also good. So we've done a lot in other countries, historically the US and Australia, and we've done quite a bit in Germany. We've been there since 2014, as you can see, 22 different opportunities at over $138 million. Just quickly on where we go, just to add to that, when it comes to any investment, majority of the time it comes down to numbers. It is number crunching. And when it comes to property investment, it's very much looking at the entry, holding and exit costs. And the reason why we're not in Australia, for example, anymore is because of the fact that the Chinese, they always see a good thing. They started buying up property there and the locals got a bit upset. So the government doubled transfer duty and doubled interest rates for foreign investors. And in the US, it's also very difficult. There are different laws in different states. It's very difficult to get hold of finance. And, one of the big benefits about direct property investment, as I mentioned earlier, is the ability to leverage. And therefore, if we can't guarantee that, it obviously has an effect on our on what we can do. But right now, we've got a lot of opportunities in the UK, in about 7 or 8 different regional cities. Just about to launch something in Edinburgh, and we've also done quite a bit in Portugal over the past. So I'm not going to go through this in huge detail, but essentially, what our USP for IP Global is our business model. And what we do is we purely operate in the residential space. And it's our underwrite model that makes us very different. And what I mean by that is that in order for us to secure off-plan or off-market opportunities for our clients, we will negotiate directly with a developer that we've either dealt with or done due diligence on and that we're happy with. And we'll put our money where our mouth is. So we put down 10%. And we also commit to a legal guarantee that if we don't sell the apartments that we've taken, and in a lot of cases, we'll take the whole development, then we will buy them. Now, we're creating economies of scale. And I think for any investor, when you know that the company that's recommending the opportunity has done all their due diligence and research, that's fantastic. But when they're actually financially committed as well, you know that you're going to be looked after. In addition to that, we also understand the complications that come with direct property investment, i.e. buying into REITs is very simple, not much paperwork. Whereas direct property, there's a lot more to it. So we have our end-to-end approach, which is everything from recommending lawyers, the conveyancers to do the legal work, bond originators, mortgage brokers to get the best financing. And also we have a company called Complete, and there are other letting companies where they'll do everything from the snagging to the handover, referencing, finding the tenant and managing the property on your behalf. Now, with any investment case, when we're looking at, and again, I don't mean to skip through stuff, but I've got to be wary. There is a lot that goes into it, and these are just some of them. But essentially, with any investment case, we are looking at what always comes down to a supply and demand imbalance. But there are different reasons why you'll come to that, and it's normally to do with population growth, both naturally and also due to job creation. So you'll have, we'll be looking very closely at how diverse the economy is and what's happening in the employment sector. So that all fits in together with population growth, and the more the population growth, the more demand there is for housing. There's also other things that will be happening, especially in these old cities around the world. I always use Liverpool as an example, but because it's people are familiar with it. But the Mersey, where that whole next to the Mersey River regeneration scheme. So there's certain cities that will go through a regeneration. If you cast your mind back, those familiar with London and Canary Wharf, Isle of Dogs is what it was called. I lived there. That was a regeneration scheme, and it's obviously many, many years ago now. And then obviously we're looking at the developer very closely. We're looking to make sure that we're getting good price points, both purchase prices and price per square meter or square foot, making sure on the legal side that everything is obviously on board and above board, and then the due diligence just across the entire investment scheme. So moving on to Germany, just a quick overview, a massive country and a population of around 83.2 million. They have a massive inward migration. Now, don't be confused with that migration as people that are looking for asylum. The inward migration has a lot to do with the skilled workforce as well. They're just very encouraging on that front. They also, with regards to universities, their universities, if you can get into them, and Berlin and Leipzig, but especially Berlin, I think they have about 185,000 students. There is no cost for university, and in a lot of cities that have a university population will subscribe to the fear of the brain drain, i.e. they want to keep them in the city because that is where the knowledge and that's what is going to drive their economy. So a big inward migration, working population of about 54 million. And it's actually ranked 4th in the world when it comes to research and development. It's got the 4th largest economy in the world at 3.65 trillion. And just to put that in perspective, that's 930 billion more than the UK. It's the 3rd largest exporter in the world. Not a fact I normally put up, and the reason why I have this time around is that that is going to continue because of the slightly weakened euro. So exporting is going to continue to be very strong. But then looking at a couple of other, incidentals that, people may overlook, but the high net worth individual forecast by 2026 is to be 5.3 million people, which will be the 4th largest amount of high net worth individuals in the world. Again, a stat very worthwhile looking at. And then currently right now, there's a housing supply and demand imbalance of 1 million. So looking at IP Global and our experience, I think with any investment or any investment firm you want to deal with, you want to be dealing with people that have a track record and have experience, and we have a wealth of it. We are very good at going into markets right at the beginning or close to the beginning, and we've been in first entered into Berlin in 2014. So this is not a new market to us in any way or form. And from Berlin, we noticed that Leipzig was showing similar signs, although obviously a far smaller city than Berlin. But just as a little useless fact, in Germany, they do actually refer to Leipzig as Little Berlin. So that's not the foreigners or me just trying to promote it. That is local Germans who say that. So as you can see, 22 developments and across both Berlin and Leipzig. Now, the unique investment case, and sorry, I wanted to mix it up a bit because I can be quite, my dulcet tones and my presentations be a bit boring. So this is a slightly misleading, but it's for those who can guess it. It's got nothing to do with the Pet Shop Boys or the fact that German's very well known for synth pop. It's actually referring to East End boys and West End girls, i.e. East and West. So what I'm really talking about is the divide between Berlin and in Germany, which was the Berlin Wall. And this is the start of, and this is where the appreciation of the investment case and why Berlin and Leipzig are very different compared to other major cities in Germany. And that was essentially when the wall came down, there was a mass exodus. As you can imagine, the people that had been living in the communist East, they wanted to know more about what was happening in the real world. And, you know, Berlin and Leipzig suffered dramatically. And you'll see top left, that picture's from 1985. Top right, that's 2013, and then bottom, that's Berlin as it stands in 2022. So with that max exodus, you can imagine what effect that had on the economy, which crumbled, and also house prices just dropped. Now, I wanted to put that in perspective in the sense of, you know, where the value, and we're always looking for value, and why we particularly like Berlin and Leipzig in this current situation we find ourselves in with inflation, rising interest rates, and so forth and so on. This is a chart, and I'm not sure how well you can see it, but all I'm trying to do here is illustrate that if you have a look, and this is across 84 cities across Europe, if you were to delve into the real nitty-gritty of the economy, size of population, the GDPs and everything else, and then look at what it costs to purchase a property. And this is basically looking at the number of years of an average income to afford a property of 75 square meters. So, for example, looking at Paris, it would take you 35 years for the average price in the outside the city center. And this list really goes down. And Berlin, you know, bearing in mind as the capital of Germany, the fourth strongest economy in the world, there's a lot of cities above Berlin where they're more expensive, and they shouldn't be, in the sense that, you know, Berlin is, the property prices are really reflecting as being very cheap. And then going all the way down to 80th position, you got Leipzig. So, you know, Leipzig economy is very strong. So this is really just highlighting the value for money that you get in order to be able to buy a property in Leipzig. So let's have a look at it. I mean, why are we there, and are we just doing it because of the, you know, the unique investment case? Well, not at all. Let's look very closely at what's happened over the last 20 years and what the forecasts are. And as you'll see, if I look at Leipzig over here, from 2000 to 2020, it had the largest growth out of any major city in Germany at 102%. And second to that was Berlin with 81%. And then, you know, familiar cities that you will know, the Stuttgarts, the Frankfurts, Hamburgs, the Munichs of the world, and somewhere like Frankfurt, which, you know, was touted when Brexit was happening to be where potentially the financial center would be relocated there, or Dublin. But, you know, these cities' GDPs haven't grown as well as Leipzig and Berlin. And then further to that, the forecast going all the way to 2035, you'll see that Berlin is ranked at the top with 82% growth on its GDP, and Leipzig coming in second. So this is not only looking back at the past, and it's always you know, important to look at what's happened in the past, but it's also looking forward. And so, you know, the economic strength and the diversification and increase in the GDPs and the economies of these two cities is something that is, you know, well worth looking at. Now, just looking again, and I'm probably a couple of slides are maybe a little bit misplaced, i.e. in which order they should be, but I just wanted to focus again, looking at value and where it sits. This is a report that's done by Knight Frank on what it would cost what $1 million worth would buy you square meter wise in various locations around the world. So Monaco at the top there, $1 million is only going to get you 17 square meters. And as you can see, the list goes down, 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 and we finally get to Berlin, which gets you 70 squares. Now, once again, for me, what I'm trying to illustrate and trying to highlight to everyone is the fact that Berlin, with its strong economy, there are cities in front of it which, really based upon, I appreciate it's not all down to economies, but based upon the economy of the entire country and the city itself, and the fact that somewhere like a Sydney wouldn't necessarily have as much problems with developable land and supply and demand, but Berlin again is just it's undervalued, and that's all I'm trying to illustrate there. Also worth looking at Cape Town, how you can get 218 squares there. So coming back to what I mentioned earlier, it's number crunching, and we always look at entry, holding, and exit costs. So what I wanted to do here was just give you an illustration so you can actually see it in sort of real terms as to what the divvy is between the various three bits, i.e. entry, and then the holding and the exit costs. So cost of buying, cost of holding, and cost of selling. Now, the reason why I put a red line here is one of the benefits that you have, that we get IP Global as a company, because we're not an agent, because we're not a developer, we're an investment house. In Germany, you would normally be subject to both paying a commission to the agent. And that commission is actually shared between the seller and the buyer, and would be about 3.74%. So there's that instant saving, because you're going directly to the developer via ourselves, and therefore there is no commission that needs to be paid. So really, as a cost point of view, as a comparable, it brings us all the way down closer to the sort of 11% mark. So as a general rule of thumb, entry costs is going to be about circa 9%. That includes your lawyer's fees, your notary and land registry fees, and your transfer tax. Your holding costs are minimal, and the reason being is that owning a property in Germany, you can offset the interest that you pay on the bond against the rental income. You also have what they call, and you can offset general costs. So that would be like agents' management fees. And then they also have something called depreciation of assets. So although the property is growing in value, this is something that is fixed, and it's actually just gone up from 1.5% to 3%, or 2% to 3%. Forgive me, I'm not sure which one of those two, but it's at 3%, which is most important. And you calculate that on 70% of the property value. So again, you work that out and you offset that against your rental income. And really, you'll find out that you end up being able to offset all those costs will add up to sufficient to be able to offset against the entirety of the rental income. And then a real big one, which is obviously what Matthew and Jade were alluding to, and is still something we look at, but on its own would never be sufficient for us to justify investing in a particular location. The actual investment case aside needs to be strong. And that is the fact that there is zero capital gains tax payable in Germany as long as you hold the property for 10 years. And there might be an agent's fee depending on whether, how you decide to set it. So if you use an agent, yes, there may be one, which, as you'll see, was incorporated within this table. And just to clarify why that is with regards to zero capital gains tax, because of, again, coming to its historical past, the communist regime meant that the private ownership was few and far between on the east side, most certainly. So this is essentially to try and get as much private ownership of property, and it doesn't need to be main residence, obviously investment, but as long as it's owned privately in individuals' names, that's their enticement for people to do that. So it's a very big enticement indeed. It's, you're looking at it's a difficult scale to go through, but around about a 28% saving. So I'm going to fly through a couple now. Forgive me, but again, I'm wary of time, and I do like to have more interaction and find out what people are asking and what's happening on that front. But when we're looking at everything, as I mentioned earlier on, we're looking at supply and demand and everything, what's happening with the economy and everything else. So the factors that I want to look at quickly here is household disposable income and unemployment trends. So as you can see, this is Berlin, and you can see the trend from, really just after 2000 when it was at its peak. with regards to the unemployment was just over 16%. That is come all the way down to 5.5%, and it's actually been sub 5 since this chart, which I don't know why it's cut off there. It shouldn't be. Oh, sorry, forgive me, over here. And the household disposable income, it's something I'm going to go through when I look at Leipzig, but it's an important factor. It's actually one of the things in my elephant in the room scenario. So, but two factors that are worth looking at, obviously, and that's why people are finding it very difficult with inflation, because normally with inflation, historically, when we've experienced it, the unemployment rates have been far higher across various countries in the world. And then the housing supply and demand. So having a look at this, there's already, as I mentioned, 1 million across Germany. So now specifically looking at right now at Germany, at Berlin in particular, there's currently a housing deficit of around 85,000 units. The problem is they're not building quick enough to be able to catch up and make any inroads. And even when we take the absolute best scenario of the supply that's been done in the last 10 years, they still will never catch up. And the reason being, and especially of late, although historically, let me start with historically, has been the bureaucracy that goes with getting planning permission and all the paperwork that's done. And it's actually fairly old fashioned, believe it or not. People have to go to offices and sign things and read out documents and so forth and so on. So it's an arduous task and it takes a very long time. Then you add into that, obviously, the pandemic, which had an effect on the supplying of goods and also obviously of employment and actual staff levels and workers. So that's obviously had an effect on the amounts of completions that went through. And then more recently now with inflation, which means cost of goods going up, cost of materials, and there's been obviously with Germany so close to the Ukraine, logistics, supply chain logistics, that's also making it quite difficult. So you add these all up and you're basically in a situation where you've got a city that's going to suffer from a supply and imbalance situation for some time to come. Again, I'll come on to a couple of things that will just highlight that. Then Leipzig, Leipzig for some people, everyone pretty much knows Berlin. Leipzig for some may not be as familiar. Just going back to the picture of Germany, just so you get an idea, it's about an hour and 15 minutes by train, southwest from Berlin. The situation in Leipzig, it's a fantastic city. I was there in 2020, a lovely city. The architecture there is fantastic. It's got a good university population. Merkel actually was a university there. Probably now, for those who are sports fanatics, which most South Africans are, I certainly am, it's got a football team who are now in the Bundesliga, and that's Red Bull Leipzig, performing quite well. But what's really happened is since the max exodus and then trying to build the city back up, it was decided by the mayor that really the best thing to do was focus on 5 core areas, that being health and biotech, logistics, which is a very important one because it is one of the biggest logistic locations in the whole of Europe. Then also media and creative industries, automotive and suppliers. I mean, that's sort of almost taken as a given, and then energy and environment. So really, without going through this, in a nutshell, I could turn around and just say the investment cases for Berlin and Leipzig are very strong. So I don't want to go through this in particular detail, but you can quite clearly see what's been happening since 2005 and the amount these industries have increased. So, having a notable effect on the economy, hence why it had the biggest increase in its GDP out of all the major cities in Germany. So again, looking at household disposable income and unemployment rates, something once again I'm very keen on looking at, and that's due to the fact that with inflation and the cost of living going up, you really want to be looking at locations where both there's a supply and demand imbalance, where there's growing economy, but where the affordability is there with regards to disposable income, so that they can absorb price increases. So it's a factor that is underestimated. But as you can see, not only has the unemployment rate dropped all the way from 21% down to 4%, over here down to, I must stop doing that, dropping down to just below 5% and forecast to get to 4% in 2040. But the household disposable income has had quite a hefty increase, and the forecast is to carry on increasing quite significantly going forward. So very positive signs, certainly when you're looking at an investment case. And then the supply and demand, very much an echo and repeating myself with regards to the Berlin case, very much Leipzig is just a smaller Berlin, again, repeating myself. But, you've got a deficit, and again, certainly not nearly enough supply, and also just a lack of developable land, and arduous process of getting planning permission and so forth and so on. So that supply and demand is going to exist going forward for quite some time. So just looking at it, again, when you've got this huge population growth, so the forecast would be a 38% increase from 2000 to 2040. That's a massive increase in population, because they're creating job opportunities and growing the economy. Household growth forecast going up 17%. And then you're looking at, capital growth on average has been about 5.9% growth, rental growth at about 4.6%. And then a key one here, vacancy, which forgive me, I didn't even mention with Berlin, although I do have it in a summary slide. But the vacancy rate in Berlin is 1.5%, and in Leipzig at 2%, which is really unheard of when it comes to major cities having such low vacancy rates. And when you're investing in property, you want to know that the property is going to grow in value, but because you're leveraging and you've got a mortgage to pay or a bond to pay, you want to know that there's going to be a tenant in there. So when there is such low vacancy rates and there's just not nearly enough supply, that obviously is a great peace of mind and just strengthens the investment case on a whole. I will come to a summary where I'll go through a couple of things, but I just wanted to show you a couple of opportunities we have at the moment. Now, our opportunities in both Berlin and Leipzig have tended to be unlike what you tend to see in the UK, which are in the UK would be, bigger apartment blocks. We tend to be looking at boutique, fairly small, anything from 8 to 22, maybe up to about 30 maximum apartments in a particular block. And for me, that's a big advantage. Looking at something that's boutique, it not only fits in with the supply and demand situation, so there's fewer apartments to choose between, but the desirability factor comes into play, which I think will have a very positive effect on the investment case itself. So this is actually, the Bowen is it's a total refurbishment of an existing building, which will be completed. It's almost completed, but the actual completion from a purchasing point of view for our clients is only going to be in September, the end of September. So just quickly going through, this is a total of 8 units. Well, actually 9. We ended up taking the top apartment, which is a 2-bed top floor apartment. 4 studios, 4 1-beds. As you can see, physical completion, so the refurb, they're just running slightly behind on that, but should be this month. And then there are other things that need to be done and inspections that need to be done that are going to delay it. So there's plenty of time. It's in a neighborhood which is a little bit further out, but what we've done there, it's 22 minutes into the center of Leipzig, but it blends in well with that sort of millennial type desire, and also the feedback from after the pandemic, and that is wanting to live an urban lifestyle but in a rural environment. So this is set in an area this behind it is a lot of parkland, and it's a lot of land where it's protected, and therefore there won't be any development taking place there, which I think is a real bonus. So you're getting best of both worlds, outside space, but also only 20 minutes into the city. Prices range between 157,000 to 274,000 euros. Sizes, the studios are between 37 and 60, and the one bed is 62 square meters. So just having a look here, just so you get a feel for it. This is the one bedroom apartment, the lounge, the bedroom, then the bathroom area and the kitchen. Then the studio is here, and this is unlike a lot of studios. People, micro apartments, CBRE were recently quoted as saying that they feel that they'll become, especially in places like Europe, they'll become an entity in their own right within real estate because there's just not enough land. So, but you tend to find that your kitchen is combined with the living area, and in this particular case, as you can quite clearly see, there is a separation of the two, which is very desirable. Plus this outside space, which looks over the parklands. And then the yields on this, we're looking at around about, these are rental yields of about 5.22. We'll come back to the the cash flows and everything later on, and the projections. The payment process, very simple. There's a 3,000 reservation fee, and then there's acquisition costs upon notarization. Notarization is actually exchange of contracts, and it's actually when you become the legal owner of the property and it's notarized in your name. Then 30% of the purchase price due 3 months later. The second payments, that's going to be postponed now, because if you work out the maths, that would already have come. So the likelihood is that 28% will be due in July, August, and then the final 42% in September. Now, you may think, well, hang on, that's the whole lot. You're actually only going to be paying the 30% here, and then 8% of the 28%. And then the rest will be financed through the mortgages that are already pre-agreed. Again, I'll go on to that. Just quickly to go through another one. Again, sorry, aware of timings and everything. So this is the Boulevard. Now, what I really loved about not only just the fantastic investment case with Berlin and Leipzig, and the fact that there are boutique apartments, but also the fact that we're looking at both new builds and refurbs. And I'll expand on that just now, but this is basically a landfill. So either side, this is a CGI. This is an existing building there, and this is an existing building. So this is the gap within those buildings. And this is a total new build and is only going to be completed in February 2025. So it gives you the ability to really take advantage of buying off plan by putting down not a huge amount of money, but owning an asset that's worth a lot more than you've actually put down. So again, looking at some details for you: 6 one-bedrooms, 6 two-bedrooms, fitting into that boutique that I like so much. Completion date 2025. Price range between 217 and 382,000, and size range from 38 to 70 squares. Now, the location of this particular development is far more central than the Bowen. It's a mere 10 minutes into the center of Leipzig. It's quite close to the zoo. It's a very well-established area. So, it will be, price per square meter will be more expensive than the previous opportunity I showed. Again, payment process, 3,000 to secure. Then you've got your acquisition costs, reminding you with regards to the what they are from the previous slide that I had on entry, holding, and exit costs. So that's about 9%, and then 30% would be due 3 months after notarization. So this is likely to be on a calculation somewhere towards August this year, and then the rest of the payments are in line with construction milestones. So these payments are actually made via your lawyer and can only be asked for by the developer once they've reached certain milestones. And just as a reminder, you are actually the legal owner at this stage. So your protection and your rights, again, are very well protected with regards to if anything were to go wrong. And I'll just touch on that slightly just now. Again, very quickly, this is the 2-bed, the layout, again, big outside space. And the 1-bed, very well proportioned with a lift in the middle here that goes up on the floors. So this is the outside space, as you can see, for the development. These are the 2 beds over here. So this side, the 1-bedrooms are over here, and this is an emergency staircase coming out, but all got outside space. The other thing just to mention there is on both of these developments, and is quite typical within German property, is there is a basement where you can put your storage stuff. It's allocated to your unit where you can put storage and your bicycle and so forth and so on. Okay, transparency, elephant in the room. The reason why I wanted to bring this up, it's and it might be a question that people are asking, but I again, like I said, I like to be very transparent and sort of hit things front on. So the war in the Ukraine, what effect is that having? What's going to happen going forward? I don't know the answer to that, and I really would be surprised if anyone's sitting, doing anything I do, or even people that that may be having more dealings with the situation would be able to tell you what the situation is going forward and what's going to happen. It's an incredibly worrying situation with regards to the people of Ukraine and everything, and we can all appreciate that. The problem we have is it has had an effect on obviously what's happening with regards to inflation, but that's been felt across the world. But Germany are suffering a bit on the energy front, and that needs to be looked at. But the answer is I don't know what's going to happen, and in that respect, and I think that's the only honest answer anyone could give. What is happening with regards to the energy costs going up and general inflation is the fact that that's why we look so closely at the incomes of people in these cities and what is the household disposable income and the affordability on that front. And we look at what's happening with regards to the new properties that you're buying into and what effect that's going to have, because with any new build or any refurbishment, there are new efficiency ratings that have come in play, which the developers have to adhere to, and existing buildings are going to have to upgrade the efficiency ratings of their property, which is going to cost a hell of a lot of money. So owning property right now or buying into property is beneficial because costs for existing property is going to go up when landlords and owners are going to obviously make the conversion to a higher standard of energy ratings. And also tenants-wise, tenants are going to want to live in property that is up to date and is very efficient on that front. So it is a fantastic time to buy with regards to those factors. Rising interest rates has had an effect, and essentially what it has, the effect it's having is, again, it's making, from an international investor's point of view, this being a very good time to buy. Because right now, as property is commonly referred to as an inflation hedge, that is certainly been seen in various cities around the world with regards to rental yields. But it's very apparent in places in Germany, and Leipzig and Berlin qualify on that front most definitely, because you've essentially having people that locals that, because interest rates have gone up by threefold, they've decided to delay buying and therefore are renting, and there is just not enough supply. So again, it fits in very well with international buyers who are going to own property, because the vacancy rates are just going to come down and it's just going to push the yields up. So although the rental yields are moderate now, we have seen over the last 6 months that they've gone up quite a bit. And again, I'll show you that. And right at the end there, I've just put supply and demand, because it's always going to feed its way back there in some way or other. So very quickly, I just want to show you a couple of quotes. So this was back BNP Paribas in a report in Q3. For the most part, the investment market in Leipzig remained largely unaffected by the changing interest rate environment. It went on to say, carried by well-performing occupier markets that offer both reliability and stability of value, Leipzig investment market is heading for another strong full year's result. So, very much along those lines, again, having a look at someone like Deutsche Bank in one of their reports, the fundamental supply shortages are already over in many German cities, according to our predictions. However, bottlenecks in places like Berlin, Cologne, Hanover, Leipzig, and Stuttgart. And this is the key here. We continue to expect particularly long cycles for Berlin and Leipzig. Berlin has become a top European research and corporate location, coming back to what Berlin's up to with diversifying its income, very good at startups and all that type of stuff. And it's a city which is surrounded by, moving on to Leipzig, it's a city surrounded by smaller villages. So you've seen that population growth that I referred to, 38% from 20 to 2040 prediction. That's because there's job creation, but also a lot of people moving in. So, really, I'm just trying to illustrate to everyone that, although some people may feel that to a degree, is this the right time to buy? These are two cities that are still growing. They're undervalued, so any slight reduction in value will be negligible compared to other cities around the world, whilst we fight with inflation and high interest rates. But because they're undervalued, the growth going forward is going to be that much quicker compared to other cities. A couple more, forgive me, but I do think it's important for you, not just to rely on IP Global or what Holborn say, let's have a look at the real people on the ground. So Deutsche Bank, this was in their outlook for 2023-24. The fundamental supply shortage is large, presumably at its all-time high since reunification. So, again, we've got a construction costs are rising. So it is going to ensure that prices don't drop, and is certainly one of the indications as to why property is going to go up in price, and the fact that they're still not going to be able to meet the supply that's required. And then finally, high energy standards probably protect against price declines. According to Hyperport, prices for new houses have hardly fallen so far. This is high energy standards of new properties. Many people are likely to have a high willingness to pay, both for economic reasons and to hinder a severe climate crisis. So, you've got a whole lot of different factors coming into play, but just showing you that, the elephant in the room is walking out, because these are factors that are being looked at and that we're looking at, and we're not trying to, dodge them or pull the wool over anyone's eyes. These are very key factors which are negative, but also incredibly positive at the same time, if you understand the dynamics that are in play. And then finally, I just want to quickly give you some, this is a report that Knight Frank do on an annual basis. I think it was the 17th one. They're very proud of it. 60 pages worth of a lot of reading. So I've only put in 2 pages, or 2 key elements that I wanted to look at. And this is really just having a look at where the portfolio is made up of. And as you can see, no matter what you talk about when you talk about an investment portfolio, the fact is, and yes, it does include your main residence property, but a lot of people's wealth is the majority is compared to all the other asset classes is in property and second homes. So that's just giving you an idea what the split is. And then a couple of others here. Residential property considered the safest asset class. So this is by their, this whole report, this wealth report, is about the high net worth individuals and ultra high net worth individuals. And property is seen as the number one safest asset. Now, I always say to everyone all my clients, and whenever I'm doing any presentations, property is a medium to long-term investment, especially direct property. So it should be looked upon like that. There are no quick bucks to be made. If it's too good to be true, then it's not true, full stop. That's how it works. Or you're going to have to enter into markets, property markets, which are in emerging countries and where the risk is just naturally that much higher, and if that's how you want to balance it, that's fine. But this is a key indicator of why people love property. And then just quickly looking at, on average, of residential property is held outside their country of residence. So only 13% people in Africa have property outside, where you look at, established, the bigger, more established, probably, dare I say, continents or areas around the world. So Asia, 28%, Australasia, well, those are the Aussies. They don't leave where they are, basically, and they got such a big.
So,
yes, Matt.
Tom, sorry for interrupting, but just before due to load shedding, it's still one of the things I'm having to get to grips with after having moved back to South Africa.
Yes.
But this is what I wanted to say when I was explaining at the very beginning, in terms of a lot of South Africans, when it comes to property, they love property, but they will only look within their own town. They'll rarely look outside their own town or even outside their own country. And this is very evident from this particular fact. In Africa and in South Africa in particular, I think it's because of upbringing. We're taught, and you're brought up that property is a safe investment, and you build a property portfolio as soon as you can. You have to own your own home. Whereas I have many high net worth individual clients where they don't own their homes, that they rent them. But many clients locally like to own property, and very few, despite what the trend is globally, will not invest outside of South Africa, or even outside of their own province, or even outside of the town where they're living.
Yeah.
Yes, and you're quite right, Matthew, and I appreciate you coming in there. I was even getting bored of my own dulcet tones. You're right, and but there's also the understandable thing is that there is sometimes there's just a lack of knowledge and a lack of education on that front, and that's why we're here. But at the same time, there is the fear of it's been so far away, and how they're going to be able to do it, and the complications, and hence why we have our end-to-end approach, and also why we do so much research and due diligence, and why you want to use a firm that's got a huge amount of experience over 17 years
Absolutely.
in the market. So but it's a staggering fact that this figure needs to increase, and it will do, because the one thing that a lot of these people that are investing in these locations, the one thing that they don't have, and it's not nearly as poignant as it is here in South Africa, and that is concern about their own currency. People in Europe buying something, in the UK, so they earn it in euros, they're buying a sterling asset, not a big concern. Same thing with the Far East, Middle East. These, and all my colleagues, because, the business we do, and myself and Shelley and Charmaine, who are the three people that look after South Africa, the business that we do is fairly insignificant compared to all the business done by colleagues across the world. So, but the one thing we have that they don't have is the currency play, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to go into more detail.
Well, exactly. There's something that I often ask many clients, and I always get the same answer, yet none of them are in that sort of position. I generally tend to ask clients, look, if you had the choice between getting rent in pounds and euros or dollars versus getting rent in rands, which would you prefer? And I've never had anyone tell me they prefer the rands, but that's what they own.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm just going to wrap it up here, and the USPs, and just to maybe cover a couple of points that I want to emphasize. So, and also just cover a couple of things I haven't gone into much detail on, but undervalued property markets. So we've been through that, a massive supply and demand imbalance, been through that. Very low vacancy rates. So I referred to the fact that I missed it on Berlin, but I knew it was in a summary somewhere. So Berlin 1.5%, Leipzig 2%. Those are going to keep coming down.
Very sorry, Tom, if I can just interject there. So I was looking, I think just yesterday, with regards to vacancy rates inside South Africa. And it's close to sort of 10%. And that's staggering when you compare that to somewhere like Berlin and Leipzig. It honestly is. The chance of you having a property, an investment property standing empty, is substantially higher.
It is, and if we didn't want to go as dramatic as that, as some people may, those that are more pessimistic may say, you're still looking at major cities within the UK and other established nations where these figures stack up as still being staggering, because their vacancy rates will be, somewhere 3.5%, 4%, 5%. So, this is much lower than usual.
Yeah, I believe I was told a while back already that a part of the reason for this is history. quite simply the fact that with the amount of wars that have happened, people in Germany prefer to rent rather than own something that could be destroyed.
It has something to do with it. I would also, refer back to my comment on the communism and the fact that there wasn't private ownership. But that certainly is a factor. And also history, when you talk about history, you talk about how old these cities are. And I think sometimes we forget as South Africans that we're dealing in Europe where these cities are extremely old. I mean, we used to have opportunities in Lisbon, and Lisbon's the oldest city in Europe. And I went there, and there's just nothing, there's no land to develop there. And that's commonplace amongst a lot of cities throughout Europe. So that also means that people are, that there's just not enough supply, and therefore that will have a direct effect on the vacancy rates. Something I haven't gone into detail on, and forgive me, I was trying to see the slide from 105 slides down to as little as possible. Don't worry, it wasn't that many, but I didn't want to spend too much time on things, but I do think this is important. It's one of the factors why I love Germany, sitting in my position where I can offer anything really, why I tend to revert to Leipzig and Berlin. And that's because within the obtaining of the acquisition of the asset, we actually, before we bring the opportunity to market, we will get an independent lender to have a look at the opportunity itself. They'll be looking at its location and the prices. And they will confirm before you've even launched that they're happy to lend on that development. Now, that's an incredibly good thing to have, which you don't get in the UK or anywhere else, because essentially what you're doing is you're getting a third party. They've got nothing to do with us, nothing to do with Holborn, nothing to do with anyone. They are a lender. They're actually a pension fund in this particular case, where they are happy to agree to lend on this property. So it's giving you that peace of mind as an investor that you're paying the right price and that you're actually investing in a good, solid opportunity. They offer the financing subject to personal underwriting, obviously, which is fairly straightforward, to be quite honest, because they almost do what I would call asset-backed lending, i.e. they're more bothered about the asset itself and then the rental income. And as you can see, with low vacancy rates and a growing value, which obviously then means the equity is growing, they're not really concerned. They're just going to do a tick box exercise and make sure they cover everything off in case they get audited. But they will lend up to 65% of purchase price. They do it on fixed rates. The fixed rates are either fixed for 5, 10, 15 or 20 years. The current 10-year fix, which is this perfect storm because it fits into the owning the property for 10 years to avoid paying capital gains tax in Germany, the 10-year fixed rate is at 3.91, and that's fairly recent. So when I first started with IP Global, their 10-year fix was at 2.3%, but obviously interest rates were very low. Now, this is not unusual, and interest rates where there are now, and it's something I was going to mention about, I think the millennials have suddenly fallen off their chairs because they just can't believe interest rates are so high. Well, having worked in London and within structured finance from sort of the late 90s, or 96, 97, all the way to 2013, the majority of that time, interest rates were around about 5%. So interest rates for me are still fairly low. It's just because of after the global financial crisis, we suddenly rates were cut, and we've been living in a very low interest rate environment for a very long time. But within the scenarios of borrowing 60 to 65% at these rates, and with even the yields where they are at the moment, although they're growing, they are almost cash neutral investments from day one. And I think that's really what people are looking for, that cash neutral from day one, and taking advantage of borrowing ability to increase the yields and returns on your investment. And also the peace of mind knowing that it's fixed for that period of time. So even if rates were to go further up, you wouldn't have to worry about it. The exceptional tax breaks, which I've been through, buyer protection, as I mentioned, you become owner from notarization, whether it's a refurb or an off plan. But there's a lot of caveats in there that protect you then, therefore, as the owner, and there are things that need to be done. So the risk of you being out of pocket And for example, if the developer did not complete by taking the boulevard into, as an example, if they did not complete by February 25, there's a long stop date, which will be in the contract. And when they get to the long stop date, if it's not completed by then, you will then start receiving a rental income anyway. So that's a protection. There's also protection with regards to should something happen to the developer where another developer will step in. Whereas in the UK, when you exchange contracts, you don't own the property. So if anything goes wrong between then and completion, you still stand to potentially lose money depending on how much you've paid at exchange of contracts, because only a portion of it's protected. So that, for me, peace of mind for someone who likes the concept of buying off plan, understands the, putting in less money but owning an asset that's worth more, and what that does to, your paper-based growth on your investment, but wants peace of mind and is a bit risk adverse, then this is definitely a market you want to look at. Varied completion dates and boutique development. So varied completion dates, the reason why I mention this is some people have got cash that's sitting there, it's burning a hole in their pocket. They want to invest it immediately. Some are quite happy to do something that's totally off plan and wait 24, 28 months. So to have, and what we normally do is, and just so happens the two examples I've given you do fit into these varied completion dates. There's also, to add to that, there's also a varied price range as well. And boutique developments, I don't want to go on and on about this because I'll probably get shot by someone. But I'm a big fan of this because I believe that it will have an effect on how well it performs. And then finally, we're looking at countries, and Jade and Matthew have already covered this, and I've touched on it. Diverse economies, and then the excellent student populations. As mentioned, both of these cities have very well regarded universities, hosted them, so a big population. And when you get into it, it's free, so you don't have, even post grads, once you've finished your studies and you're not 40 and still paying off a student loan. And you can imagine, just thinking about that logically, there are people that are, and this is very well known, it's talked about all the time in places like America and the UK, that people are just continually paying off student loans. You can imagine what effect that has on their disposable income. So when you talk about inflation and affordability, these things that are overlooked shouldn't be, because these are the kind of things we're looking very closely at when the market changes. We don't just stick to one theory. IP Global are very good at adapting to what's happening in the greater environment. And then it's over to Jade and Matthew for the cash flows.
Okay.
Thank you, Tom. I think, we're just running a little bit over time, unfortunately, because we only booked till 3 o'clock. So, Matt, I don't know if you want to keep that for our next webinar.
I think that might be good. Tom, if I may ask you, on your screen at the bottom, you should have a poll button where you can launch a poll. And for our viewers out there, that'll give you some insight and some questions that you can take part in. So just very briefly, with regards to the whole cash flows and from the investment sort of case, if we take a look at the boulevard as an example, now let's say you had 2 million rand, or roughly 170,000 euros 10 years ago, and you decided you wanted to invest that money. Had you gone into the JSE 10 years ago at about the 40,000 mark, now it's at around 72, 75,000, you'd be up 80%. So your 2 million would have grown to 3.6. Had you instead gone and opted for a South African property route, the average national for South African property over the last 10 years has been 4%. So you'd be up 40%, 2.8 million now. That same 2 million, which back 10 years ago would have gotten you that 170,000 euros at 11 Rand sort of 70 at the time. Now, if we take the internal IRR or the growth in terms of the property on that, it's an average of around 10% per annum if you leveraged that. That means you'd be up 100%. Not only that, when we take currency, and this is the more important thing, why one looks at a primary currency property, something in dollars, in pounds, or in euros, from 11 Rand 77 back then to around 19 Rand 50 at the moment. That's another 66% growth on top of that 100% growth, meaning you're looking at about 160% return in terms of your capital. And that would put you in the same rand basis now of around 5.2 million versus either the 3.6 having gone in the JSE or the 2.8 having gone into local South African property. So it's almost sort of a no-brainer. You want to do it in primary currency, and you want to do it in an area where there is a very high demand. It's one of the most basics when it comes to economics. Demand drives prices and it drives growth. Anything from your side, Jade?
No, I think the numbers don't lie, and I do think that when it comes to the cash flows, and I mean, we had 1 or 2 questions now with regards to interest rates and what you'd qualify for. There are quite a few factors that we need to take into account. So I think setting up an individual call to answer specific questions is definitely the best way to go, because there is quite a lot of information at our fingertips that we are very happy to share with you. We just are obviously conscious of running over time.
We are effectively out of time, yes, unfortunately.
If I can very quickly then,
yes.
I've got a couple of questions that have been asked and I'd love to ask them. So are there residency stroke citizenship options? No, they're not. It's not like a golden visa, the Portugal, there are about 37 of those investment residency or citizenship by investment in different guises, be through property or through companies or through cash, but Germany's not one of them, I'm afraid. So that's that first question. The second one, I'm a South African living and working in Germany. How would I be evaluated for a mortgage? The best thing to do in that circumstances, it would be different. You would have access to far more competitive rates. But, I would recommend you speak to a local broker. There's a company called Berlin Finance. Martin Bonnet is the bond originator there. But you will be able to get higher loan to values and far more competitive interest rates. So, that is a huge benefit for people that are actually located in Germany.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tom, for the wealth of knowledge that you shared with us. I think everyone
Not at all. Sorry, I need to keep a better eye on timing. So my apologies to everyone. I guess there's just so much we could talk about, and I've just got to keep praising myself.
Well, that's the thing. There is a lot in terms of the German investment case, and hence there's a lot to have to go through. And I'm sure, as you were saying, you probably speak on for hours.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one-to-ones with people, we're very much here to do that and take people's personal situation into account and budgets and timings and so forth and so on. So thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And
thank you, Matt.
Goodbye to everyone. Thank you, Jade.
Thank you.
Cheers.